History loves giving out the title the Great. Alexander the Great, Constantine the Great, Pompey the Great, Charlemagne, the list goes on. But in most cases, the people who carried that title were simply successful conquerors who didn't accomplish much beyond their military campaigns. There was one ruler, though, who truly earned it. He built one of the largest empires the ancient world had ever seen, stretching from the Indus River all the way to the Aegean Sea. He was admired not just as a brilliant military leader, but also as a skilled state builder known for his rare generosity towards the peoples he conquered. That ruler was Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid Empire. King of kings, lord of the four corners of the world. The only non-Jew ever recognized by the Jewish people as a Messiah. For centuries, he was held up as the model of what a wise and just ruler should be. And yet, despite everything he achieved, much of what we know about him comes not from Persian sources, but from Greek writers like Herodotus, Ctesias, and Xenophon, whose accounts often contradict one another. A man who helped shape the ancient world remains, even now, a figure surrounded by legend and mystery. This is his story. To understand how Cyrus rose to power, we first need to picture the world he was born into. In 612 BC, the once mighty Neo-Assyrian Empire collapsed, and four major powers emerged from its ruins: Egypt in the southwest, Lydia in Anatolia, Babylon in Mesopotamia, and the Lydian Empire to the east and north. The strongest of these was Media. Its territory stretched from the Persian Gulf all the way to what is now Turkey. It was home to a mix of peoples: Elamites, Medes, Urartians, Persians. And in 593 BC, in the city of Anshan, one of Old Elam's capitals, by then a Median vessel, the future ruler of half the known world was born. Anshan was ruled by King Cambyses I. According to Herodotus, he married a Median princess, Mandane, the daughter of King Astyages, and their child was Cyrus. Persian inscriptions from that era, however, simply refer to Cyrus as the son of Cambyses, with no mention of Astyages at all. Ctesias offers a different story entirely, claiming Cyrus was the son of a Persian bandit named Herodotus. Herodotus preserved the most famous tale of Cyrus's birth, one that strongly resembles the stories of Sargon of Akkad, Moses, Romulus and Remus, and many other legendary figures. In this version, Astyages learns that Cyrus is destined for greatness and orders the newborn killed. The infant survives by pure chance and is raised by a shepherd unaware of his royal origins. He grows up clearly marked for greatness and eventually overthrows Astyages. But the story is filled with familiar mythological motifs, making it hard to treat as a genuine story. In 560 BC, Cambyses died, and Cyrus inherited the throne of Anshan. Around the same period, he married his distant relative Cassandane, who would later give him 4 children. For a while, Cyrus, much like his father, played the role of a loyal vassal. He acknowledged Median authority and paid tribute to Astyages without protest. But unlike Cambyses, who accepted this subordinate position, Cyrus had far bigger ambitions. Before he could confront Media, he needed to unite the Persian tribes under his leadership. At that time, the Persians were anything but unified. They were a loose collection of separate tribes, each one recognizing the authority of the Median king. Cyrus ruled the Massagetae, other tribes including the Meraphi, the Maspi, Dariusi, Panamai, and several others. Cyrus managed to rally their chiefs, bringing them together under a shared goal: breaking free from Median control. In 552 BC, he finally made his move. He refused to pay tribute and openly rebelled against the Medes. Astyages decided to suppress his defiant vassal and sent a large army against him, led by a general named Harpagus. The irony couldn't have been greater. Harpagus was the leader of the Median nobility that had long been dissatisfied with Astyages. and he was the one who had urged Cyrus to rise up in the first place. When the crucial moment came, Harpagus defected to Cyrus, bringing with him several Median nobles and a large portion of the army. The war between Cyrus and Astyages lasted from 553 to 550 BC. Discipline in the Median army was weak, and many Median nobles, along with their troops, defected to Cyrus. Those who stayed loyal to Astyages kept losing, battle after battle. In the decisive clash, Astyages' forces were completely routed. Ecbatana fell, and the once powerful Median Empire submitted to Cyrus. By switching sides, the Median elite delivered the final act of betrayal. This is where Cyrus showed what truly set him apart from most ancient conquerors. He spared Astyages. The old king was neither executed nor imprisoned. Instead, Cyrus kept him at his court, where he spent the remainder of his life. After this victory, the governors of Hyrcania, Parthia, and Bactria quickly acknowledged Cyrus as their ruler. He made no attempt to crush the Medes or erase their culture. On the contrary, he took a remarkably progressive step for this era. He united the Medes and Persians into a single political entity and included the Medes in the administration of the empire on equal terms with the Persians. From the very beginning, the Achaemenid Empire was a shared project built by former rivals. On the site of his victory over Astyages' forces, Cyrus founded the city of Massagetae, which later became one of the capitals of his empire. And to strengthen his legitimacy and win the loyalty of the Median aristocracy, he married Amytis, the daughter of Astyages. And with that, the foundation of the Achaemenid Empire was in place. But for Cyrus, it was just the beginning. The Persian conquest of Media unsettled the major powers of the Near East. Astyages had allies, and they weren't about to sit quietly while a Persian ruler redrew the political map. The most serious threat came from Croesus, king of Lydia. Thanks to Lydia's vast gold reserves, he was so wealthy that his name became a synonym for riches. And even today, people say, "Rich as Croesus." And as Astyages' brother-in-law, he also had a personal reason to avenge Medea's defeat. Before going to war, Croesus wanted the gods' approval. He sent lavish offerings to Delphi, golden statues, precious vessels, and asked whether he should attack Cyrus. The oracle's answer seemed perfectly clear. If you go to war against Persia, you will destroy a great kingdom. Believing this promised victory, Croesus prepared for his campaign. By 548 BC, he had gathered his forces on the banks of the Halys River. Meanwhile, Cyrus sent envoys to the Ionian Greek cities, urging them to remain neutral. Most of these cities were vassals of Lydia, and all of them, except Miletus, refused. Croesus also secured an alliance with Sparta, and that decision to take Lydia's side against Persia would have consequences far beyond this conflict. In time, it would become one of the steps leading to the legendary Greco-Persian Wars. The next year, Croesus finally launched his campaign. He crossed the Halys River, then the border between Persia and Lydia, and pushed his army into Persian territory. He had invaded Cappadocia and Cilicia, which had once been part of Media and was now a Persian province. He seized several cities and also enslaved their populations. When Cyrus received word of the invasion, he quickly gathered his forces and marched to meet the Lydians. The two armies clashed near Pteria. Croesus' army was smaller, but it had one major advantage: an elite Greek phalanx, heavily armed infantry fighting in a tight, disciplined formation. The battle lasted all day without producing a clear winner. Both sides suffered heavy losses, but by nightfall the Lydians had withdrawn, leaving the battlefield to the Persians. Realizing the scale of his losses, Croesus retreated to his capital, Sardis. He was confident that winter would bring the fighting to a halt, as it normally did in the ancient world. He sent envoys to his allies in Babylon, Egypt, and Sparta, urging them to bring their forces in 5 months, when the campaigning season reopened. He even dismissed his mercenaries, telling them to return in the spring. Cyrus had no intention of following the usual rules of war. Instead of pulling back for the winter, he struck immediately and invaded Lydia. Croesus had to react on the spot, but he still managed to gather an army almost twice the size of the Persian force. The Lydians had a particularly strong advantage in cavalry. The two armies met on the plain near the Lydian capital of Sardis. Croesus planned to use his numbers to form a longer battle line and outflank the Persians. Cyrus understood this perfectly and placed his best troops on the flanks with one goal: prevent any attempt to encircle his army. The decisive moment came from an unexpected source: the camels in Cyrus's ranks. The horses of the Lydian cavalry, not used to the sight and strong smell of camels, panicked. The riders couldn't control them, and the Lydian cavalry collapsed almost instantly, dragging the rest of the army into defeat. Seeing the battle turning into a rout, Croesus fled, leaving part of his army behind, including a contingent of Egyptian infantry that soon found itself in a tightening semi-encirclement. Impressed by their courage and discipline, Cyrus offered them their lives and a place in the Persian army instead of certain death. The Egyptians agreed, but under one condition: they would never fight against Croesus. Cyrus accepted without hesitation. They surrendered, and he took them into his service. After this, Cyrus laid siege to Sardis, the capital of Croesus, and after 14 days, the city fell. What happened to Croesus afterward depends on the source. Some say he became an advisor to Cyrus, while others claim he was executed. Whatever the truth, the Delphic oracle's prophecy proved accurate. Croesus really did destroy a great kingdom, his own. After the conquest, Cyrus appointed a Lydian named Ctesias to oversee Croesus' treasury. That decision quickly proved disastrous. Unable to resist temptation, Ctesias gathered mercenaries and tried to restore the Lydian kingdom under his own rule. Once again, the Greek cities of Ionia sided against Persia, fearing the growing threat of Persian expansion. At first, Ctesias enjoyed real success. He defeated several small Persian garrisons, entered Sardis, and besieged the Acropolis where the Persian governor had taken refuge. When Cyrus learned of the rebellion, he dispatched an army to Lydia. But as soon as news reached Sardis that a large Persian force was approaching, Ctesias fled. First to Ionia, then the island of Chios in the Aegean Sea. The people of Chios, however, struck a deal with Cyrus and handed him over to the Persians. With the revolt crushed, the Persians began their campaign in Ionia, capturing one city after another. Miletus was the only city to avoid a siege, thanks to the fact that the Milesians had not supported Croesus or Ctesias. After subduing Ionia, Cyrus allowed the Ionian Greeks to keep all of the privileges that they had enjoyed under Lydian rule. He had hoped to make use of them as skilled seafarers, and keeping their loyalty made that goal far easier. After conquering Lydia, the Neo-Babylonian Empire was the last major Near Eastern power still outside of Cyrus's rule. For a while, he avoided marching into Mesopotamia, but peace between these two regional giants was never going to hold. In the spring of 539 BC, the Persian army advanced toward Babylon. Their first major obstacle was the system of hydraulic defenses built by Nebuchadnezzar II. As Persian forces, which relied heavily on cavalry, drew closer, the Babylonians diverted water from several rivers to flood the valley in Cyrus's path. Persian engineers spent 3 months digging more than 300 canals to drain and redirect the water, making the terrain passable once again. Herodotus later portrayed this episode as an act of Cyrus punishing the river for drowning one of his sacred white horses. But in reality, it was a careful strategic engineering operation. The decisive engagement came near the city of Opis on the Tigris. Opis was strategically crucial, guarding the northern end of the Great Median Wall, a vast defensive barrier protecting Babylon. When Cyrus and his general Gobryas arrived with their army, they defeated the Babylonians with relative ease. The road to Babylon now lay open. At the time, Babylon was one of the most heavily fortified cities in the world, protected by massive walls and by the Euphrates River flowing straight through it. A direct assault would have been incredibly bloody, if not outright impossible. Cyrus needed a different approach. He began by dividing his army in two. One force camped to the north, where the Euphrates entered the city. The other positioned itself to the south, where the river flowed out. This created the appearance of a typical siege. Meanwhile, Cyrus gathered all of the non-combatants, servants, slaves, engineers, and led them north to a large artificial basin that had been dug long ago for an entirely different purpose. Working quickly, his men cut a wide channel between the river and the abandoned basin. They felled massive palm trees and used them as makeshift dams. Once the earth was removed, the Euphrates shifted course and drained into the basin. According to Xenophon, the river had once reached twice a man's height. After the diversion, it fell to barely waist deep. What had been an impassable water barrier turned into an open path straight into the city. And Cyrus had timed everything perfectly. He launched the attack on the night of a major festival, when all of Babylon was celebrating, drinking, and paying little attention to the danger approaching in the dark. That night, with the guards loosened by wine and feeling perfectly safe behind their walls, Gobryas led Persian troops along the shallow bed of the Euphrates and straight into the city. The half-drunk defenders, caught completely off guard, were unable to put up any meaningful resistance. By dawn, Prince Belshazzar was dead, and Babylon's gates stood open. King Nabonidus wasn't even in the capital. He was in nearby Borsippa. When he learned that Babylon had fallen, he surrendered without a fight. And once again, Cyrus chose mercy. Nabonidus was allowed to go into exile in Carmania, where he lived out the rest of his life peacefully. There is another version of the story, one claiming that Babylon's own elite, fed up with Nabonidus' rule, opened the gates to Cyrus themselves. Whatever truly happened, all sources agree on one thing. The fall of Babylon was shockingly effortless. A city that had stood for millennia opened its gates without the titanic battle one might have expected. On October 26, 539 BC, Cyrus the Great entered Babylon in triumph, reportedly greeted by crowds celebrating his arrival. He declared himself not only the king of Babylon, but king of Sumer and Akkad as well. After the city fell, Cyrus ordered the creation of a document that would later become one of the most famous artifacts of the ancient world, the Cyrus Cylinder. This clay cylinder, covered in cuneiform script, was essentially propaganda, an early PR campaign meant to justify the conquest and present it favorably to the people of Babylon. In the text, Nabonidus is depicted as an incompetent, impious ruler who had neglected the cult of Marduk, Babylon's chief god. According to the inscription, he burdened the people with exhausting labor while preparing for the Persian advance, and Marduk, moved by the suffering of the Babylonians, set out to find a righteous king. He found one in Cyrus. Marduk, the text claims, guided Cyrus to victory and helped him enter Babylon without a battle, without destruction, and without frightening the populace. In this account, Cyrus appears as a pious servant of Marduk, the chosen liberator sent by Babylon's own deity. The Cyrus Cylinder is often described as an early declaration of human rights, as it includes a decree proclaiming freedom of worship, the abolition of slavery, and equality among peoples. This proclamation influenced later ideas about freedom, and several of its principles echo those found in the modern Universal Declaration of Human Rights. After conquering Mesopotamia, Cyrus made no drastic changes to the existing system of local governance. Babylon became one of his royal residences, but the Babylonians continued to hold prominent positions within the state administration. His rule there was not seen as foreign occupation, since he had received the kingdom from the hands of Marduk, and had performed all of the required sacred rituals. Cyrus adopted the title King of Babylon, king of the lands, though in practice Babylonia transformed from an independent kingdom into a province of his empire. After Babylon fell, all of the kingdoms of Western Southwest Asia, up to the borders of Egypt, voluntarily submitted to Persian rule. The trading cities of Phoenicia, much like Babylonian and Anatolian merchants, were eager for the stability and secure trade routes that a large unified empire could offer. Cyrus's policy of religious tolerance and respect for local traditions had its deepest impact on one small and, at the time, fairly unremarkable community within the Babylonian Empire, the Jews. Several decades earlier, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar had conquered Jerusalem and deported tens of thousands of Jews to Babylon, an event now known as the Babylonian exile. For the Jewish people, it was a national catastrophe. Their homeland was gone, the temple destroyed, and their very identities seemed on the brink of disappearing. They had become a small religious minority on the margins of a vast imperial world. After taking Babylon, Cyrus issued a decree allowing all displaced peoples to return to their homelands, and for the Jews, this meant the long-awaited return to Judea. According to tradition, he ordered the temple to be rebuilt and even allocated imperial funding for what would become the Second Temple. For the ancient world, this was extraordinary. Conquerors did not rebuild the sacred sites of subject peoples. They destroyed them or rededicated them to their own gods. For this act, the Jewish people gave Cyrus a title no foreigner had ever received: Messiah. Not Messiah in the later Christian sense of a divine savior. That idea did not yet exist in Jewish theology, but Messiah meaning the anointed one, a liberator. Cyrus the Great, a Persian pagan, remains the only non-Jewish person in history ever to be called a Messiah in Judaism. The consequences are hard to overstate. Without Cyrus's intervention, Judaism might well have faded away in Babylon, its people gradually assimilating into the broader Semitic world, much like the lost tribes of Israel had been absorbed by the Assyrians a century earlier. And without Judaism, neither Christianity nor Islam would later emerge. The entire religious landscape of the world could have looked very, very different. Military conquest is one thing, holding together a vast empire that stretched across 3 continents and encompassed dozens of peoples and millions of subjects. That was a completely different challenge. And this is where Cyrus's true genius revealed itself. Not as a commander, but as a remarkably skilled administrator and statesman. Cyrus's approach to governing was revolutionary for its time. Unlike most conquerors, he did not try to force Persian culture, religion, or language on the peoples he subdued. He kept local administrations largely intact and allowed each community to practice its own faith. The institutions of conquered kingdoms were mostly left as they were, and this proved to be an exceptionally wise strategy. By allowing people to keep their traditions, their leaders, and their way of life, Cyrus earned a level of loyalty that brute force could never have achieved. He divided this immense realm into semi-autonomous provinces known as satrapies. Each was governed by a satrap, initially chosen from among Persians or Medes. But Cyrus understood the danger of granting too much power to provincial officials, so he created a system of checks and balances. Royal inspectors were appointed to monitor the satraps and report directly to the king. Another revolutionary idea was the separation of civil and military authority within the provinces. The official who ran a region's civil administration did not command its army. Cyrus adopted this system only after several satrapical rebellions, but once in place, it made uprisings far more difficult. A satrap could only control taxes and bureaucracy, but he couldn't march against the capital unless he convinced a separate army commander to join him. This division of power created a level of political stability that, in various forms, lasted until the collapse of the Persian Empire. The backbone of Cyrus's army were the Immortals, an elite force of exactly 10,000 soldiers. They earned their name because their number never dropped. Whenever someone was killed, wounded, or retired due to age, he was replaced immediately. The waiting list of candidates was enormous, and as a result, the unit was always kept at full strength. They were the finest warriors in the empire, the king's most trusted troops. Constantly training and exceptionally disciplined, they were likely one of the most formidable military units, not only in Persia, but in the entire ancient world. Cyrus did not maintain a single fixed capital. Instead, he traveled between several key cities, depending on the season, making use of different climates and staying in touch with the various regions of his empire. He spent 7 months of the year in warm, sunlit Babylon. In spring, he moved to Susa for 3 months, and during the scorching summer, he withdrew to Ecbatana, set high in the cool Median mountains. It is interesting that Massagetae, the city Cyrus founded to commemorate his victory over Astyages, was visited by him only 7 times during his entire reign. The city had impressive palaces and royal tombs, but it served mostly a symbolic rather than an administrative purpose. Persepolis, the great ceremonial capital that would later become the crown jewel of the Persian Empire, had not yet been built. It would be created by Cyrus's successors. Cyrus's own religious beliefs remain somewhat unclear. Some historians suggest he practiced Mazdaism, an early form of Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism as a fully developed religion emerged much later, in the Sasanian period. Mazdaism was a henotheistic system in which Ahura Mazda was the one god among several, though regarded as the highest, the god of gods, much like the Persian king styled himself King of Kings. The Greek historian Xenophon describes Cyrus as a worshipper of Mithra, the god of oaths and covenants. And there is substantial evidence that Cyrus offered sacrifices not only to Ahura Mazda, the chief deity of Mazdaism, but also to other gods, such as the Babylonian Marduk and the Assyrian Ashur. After the conquest of Babylon, Cyrus continued to rule the empire for many years. The sources became noticeably sparse after 539 BC, most likely because this was the period when he focused on governing the provinces, strengthening the state, and undertaking large-scale construction projects across his realm. His son, Cambyses II, would eventually succeed him, expand the empire even further, and ultimately conquer Egypt, but that would come later. In late autumn of 530 BC, Cyrus gathered an army and set out on a long campaign across Iran, heading northeast towards the steppe frontier in what is now Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. His target was the Massagetae, a fierce Scythian people who had repeatedly raided the edges of the empire. The Massagetae were nomadic warriors, skilled horse archers, and masters of sudden raids. They were led by a formidable ruler named Thamyris, whom Greek sources describe as a woman of Amazonian spirit, both in character and in military skill. The previous chiefs of the Massagetae had been killed, and now she commanded their forces. In these events, we see a different Cyrus, no longer the prudent, measured conqueror he had once been. According to the sources, his many victories had made him overconfident. This was no longer the careful strategist who outmaneuvered Croesus and captured Babylon without a fight. This was the King of Kings, the ruler of the 4 corners of the world, who, it seems, had begun to believe in his own invincibility. When Cyrus reached the river Araxes, the boundary between his empire and the land of the Massagetae, he sent Thamyris a proposal of marriage. He hoped to gain the Scythian kingdom not through war, but through diplomacy. If that was his plan, it was a serious miscalculation. Thamyris rejected the proposal immediately. As she told her advisors, Cyrus wanted not a wife, but her lands. While the Persians were building a pontoon bridge across the Araxes, envoys arrived with a counteroffer. She would withdraw 3 days' march from the river and allow Cyrus to face her in open country. Or, if he preferred, the Massagetae would cross the river themselves and the battle would take place on Persian soil. Cyrus convened a council. Most of his advisors urged him to stay on his side of the river and strike the Massagetae as they crossed. According to Herodotus, one man disagreed, Croesus, the former king of Lydia and now Cyrus's advisor. He encouraged Cyrus to cross the Araxes and confront the Massagetae on their own ground. Cyrus took his advice. After crossing the river, he ordered a lavish camp to be set up, filled with food and wine. When the Scythian forces approached, he instructed his troops to retreat, pretending to flee in panic. It was a trap. A third of the Massagetae army, led by Thomris's son, pursued the retreating Persians and came upon the abandoned camp. The warriors feasted and drank wine. Once they were drunk or asleep, the full Persian army struck and annihilated them. Realizing he had been deceived, Thomris's son took his own life. When Thomris learned what happened, she was consumed with rage. She vowed that Cyrus would receive all of the blood he had, in her words, so desperately craved. The next day, on December 4th, 530 BC, the armies of Cyrus the Great and Queen Thomris clashed in a decisive battle. At long range, the two sides were evenly matched. Both Persians and Massagetae were famed for their skill with the bow. But once the Massagetae closed in, everything changed. Armored in heavy bronze and wielding brutal battle axes, they were devastating in close combat. The Massagetae crushed the Persian army, the very force that had conquered Media, Lydia, and Babylon. Herodotus calls this battle the bloodiest in all of ancient history. Nearly the entire Achaemenid force was wiped out. Cyrus too fell, either dying on the field or succumbing to his wounds a few days later. Thomris, staying true to her oath, found his head and plunged it into a skin filled with blood. "Now drink your fill," Herodotus records her as saying. This, however, is only one version of his death. The ancient sources do not agree. The Greek historian Xenophon claimed that Cyrus died peacefully in his bed, surrounded by family. Ctesias wrote that he succumbed to wounds from a different battle, and Herodotus offers the most dramatic and enduring account, his final fatal war with Thomris. Only one thing is beyond dispute. Cyrus died sometime before 529 BC. Somehow his body was brought back to Persia. He was buried in a tomb that has survived almost untouched to this day, laid to rest with his cloak, his weapons, and his treasures, the symbols of royal power. 2 centuries later, when Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire, he visited the tomb and read an inscription. "I am Cyrus, son of Cambyses, who founded the Persian Empire and ruled Asia. Do not envy my monument." More than a century after Cyrus's death, the Greek philosopher Xenophon wrote of him, "Those who were subject to him he honored and cared for as though they were his own children, and his subjects in turn respected him as a father." Cyrus's greatness was defined not just by the scale of his empire, though it was the largest the world had ever seen up to that point, and not merely by his military brilliance, although his campaigns displayed remarkable tactical ingenuity. His true greatness rested in something far rarer in the ancient world, an extraordinary degree of tolerance and generosity toward the peoples he conquered. One thing is certain, Cyrus the Great changed the world. He proved that an empire could be held together not only by force, but by tolerance, not only by the sword, but by wisdom. He showed that a ruler's greatness is measured not by how many enemies he destroys, but how many former enemies become loyal subjects. And perhaps now, as we continue to rediscover and rethink the history of the Persian Empire, Cyrus and his people will finally take their rightful place among the great civilizations of antiquity. King of Kings, Liberator of Nations, Cyrus the Great. If you made it to the end of this video, we really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Follow along on our journey through ancient civilizations and history. If you'd like to support the channel, join our Patreon or become a YouTube channel member. You get early access to new episodes, behind-the-scenes looks, and more. You can also leave a super thanks below to give us a little extra boost. If you want to listen to history on the go, check out our all-new podcast, Parabellum History. You can find it on all major podcast platforms. Thanks again for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.